had leprosy at a time when it was considered a death sentence as well as a ticket to social ostracism. Instead, he became the king of Jerusalem and a hero to his people. Medieval Prince Balduin IV knew his chances weren't good when he was diagnosed with leprosy at the age of 9. Before we start, be sure to subscribe and click on the bell so you don't miss new videos. This is the channel Learning the World. Let's go! Before the relatively recent discovery of the cure for leprosy, contracting the disease was as good as a death sentence. Victims of leprosy were not only condemned to a slow and painful demise, they were also shunned by their communities as unclean and driven out to live in colonies of the sick and dying, lest they spread their contamination to others. But in the 12th century, the young King Balduin II defied the odds. Prince of Jerusalem. In 1161, Balduin IV was born to King Amalric I and his wife, the Queen Agnes of Courtenay. Balduin was a sharp young kid who spent most of his time at his father's court and was tutored by the Archbishop, William of Tyre. It was at the age of 9 that Balduin was diagnosed with leprosy. The Archbishop himself diagnosed it when he saw Balduin feeling no pain in his right arm if pinched or even bitten. Balduin IV, the leper king, discovers his disease and takes the throne. Despite his affliction, the young prince demonstrated a sharp mind and was a skilled writer. Balduin was catapulted into a position of tremendous power after his father's untimely death in 1174, which turned the sickly 13-year-old into the king of Jerusalem. The French had only taken control of Jerusalem 75 years earlier, in 1099, when the First Kingdom of Jerusalem was established in the aftermath of the First Crusade. Larger than any contemporary European city and of enormous religious importance to both Christians and Muslims, Jerusalem was threatened by the powerful Sultan Saladin nearly as soon as Balduin began his reign. The fight for Jerusalem against Sultan Saladin. In an age when kings were expected to fight on the front lines, Balduin did not let his disease get in the way of his royal duties. The same year he was crowned, the teenage Balduin organized a successful attack against Damascus as part of his larger strategy to lure Sultan Saladin away from Aleppo. 2 years later, he was on the front lines again, leading his troops into battle to fend off Muslim attacks on Damascus and Andujar. Although he could only hold the reins of a horse with one hand, Balduin rode at the head of the Frankish army against the Muslim forces in the Battle of Montgassard in Egypt, where they dealt the Sultan a surprising blow. Balduini's victories made him a hero in the eyes of his people. Their king had managed to overcome his crippling illness to crush one of the most powerful armies in the world and drive back the Muslim threat. Although the leper king has often been popularly depicted as wearing a mask at all times in public to hide his disfigurement, there are no contemporary accounts of Balduin attempting to cover his face. In fact, during the early years of his reign, he showed no outward signs of the disease at all, although toward the end of his life he had developed multiple ulcers and gone blind because of the bacteria from the disease. Far from being shunned and despised because of his affliction, Balduin was only endeared to his people because of it. He had led his armies to triumph against a foe with superior numbers through a combination of courage, wit, and tremendous willpower, refusing to let a debilitating disease prevent him from defending his country himself. Although his wits were still perfectly intact, Balduin realized his body was finally succumbing to the disease at the age of 24 and offered to abdicate. His offer was refused, a mark of the tremendous esteem his people had for him. Balduin would remain king of Jerusalem until his death in 1185, ending a reign more successful than anyone ever expected. Coronation. Amalric I died in 1174, and 4 days after the death of his father, at the age of 13, Balduin was crowned the king of Jerusalem. It was the year that marked the 75th anniversary of French rule in Jerusalem. At that time, the threat of Saladini's invasion was greater than ever, and Balduin was quite aware of this threat, starting to prepare himself to deal with it. However, Balduin was too young and his health was deteriorating, so he was assisted by different regents, including Raymond III of Tripoli, who served as his regent until 1176. Battle of Montgassard. In November 1177, Sultan Saladin left Egypt to attack Ascalon. Balduini's health was quite bad, he was only able to use one hand to ride his horse. Balduin, 16 at that time, led the Frankish army and rode towards Ascalon to save the city. The Frankish army was outnumbered compared to the Muslim army, 3,000 and 4,500 Frankish men versus 20,000 and 26,000 Muslim men. The two armies clashed near Montgassard near Ramla. Balduini's army totally crushed Saladini's army. The Muslim army retreated, and the Franks chased them for almost 12 miles. Saladin barely escaped death and fled towards Cairo with only a tenth of his army. This was a major blow to Saladin, and it took him a long time to recover from it. This was the greatest achievement of the 16-year-old leper king. His victory made him a hero in his people's eyes. Final days and succession. Baldwin had no child of his own due to leprosy, so he appointed Balduin of Montferrat, his 5-year-old nephew, as his successor. On November 20, 1183, Balduin V was crowned as the co-king with Balduin IV. On March 16, 1185, at the age of 23, Balduin IV passed away. He was buried in the Church of Holy Sepulchre. After all his difficulties, he was able to defy all odds and ruled Jerusalem for almost 11 years. No one expected this, everyone thought his rule would be short-termed. But Balduin, despite his illness, is said to be one of the most successful kings of Jerusalem. That's all for today. If you liked the video, put a like and don't forget to subscribe. Bye everyone.